Perhaps, Macha, you could say just a little bit about the Covenant of the Goddess and how you came to be involved in it, and a little bit about your perception about where it is and where it's going.
I've been a member of the Covenant of the Goddess, fondly called COG, since 1981. They incorporated in the state of California as a religious nonprofit in 1975, but I didn't join until 81. It's still pretty early in the scene because through the 80s and beyond, we pagans in general, and witches in particular, were very closeted, reticent about being very revelatory about who we are and what we do and how we feel about the world. And that has, COG itself and being a member of COG has enhanced that, made us be more, not really respectable, but certainly more noticed with some respect, with some acknowledgement that we're real. We're not a bunch of kooks, although we certainly have our kooky side, but who doesn't? One of the things that I think COG has been really good for, and I don't think that I'm exaggerating when I say that a lot of the work that COG has done has been beneficial to all pagans. And so I sort of created the phrase assuring pagan rights since 1975, because that's what we have worked for. There has been some interaction with law enforcement when the occasion arises, and with journalists, and primarily what I think our strength is interfaith activity. And COG has been active in various interfaith groups since I joined, really. There was a Berkeley area interfaith council, I think it was called. I don't even know if they're existing anymore, but COG was a member at that time because I remember going to a meeting when I was still kind of a baby witch. The first big event I went to with COG is required by the state to have an annual meeting. And we call it Grand Council because, we were like that. Our treasurer is called a purse warden. Basically, it was idealistic counterculture folks. A lot of them were back to nature, back to earth people, but not everybody. Plenty of us, like everywhere, like the society in general and the craft, I'm using that term, craft, and pagan population in particular are more urban than we ever were. So considering that they're more considered nature religions than not, it seems odd that we as a world are kind of betwixt and between in terms of our direct connections to the earth and its processes, because there's a filter when you're in an urban world, or primarily urban situation, or suburban in my case. So COG has done a lot of interfaith work. I think it's been pretty righteous. It started out local, and it became national and international. COG has had a prominent member of the board of directors of the United Religions Initiative since, I don't know the year, but I'm guessing around 93, early 90s. And we had made some inroads before that. We had interfaith exchanges, not necessarily with a formal council. And other COG people have been on the board of the Parliament of the World's Religions. Pretty prominent. That's a pretty big deal, I think. Fostering interfaith understanding. We do share a planet with everybody else, and we are just as dependent as everybody else, and they are just as dependent as we. That's my focus right now is environmental activism, but I think it's fostered, of course, by interfaith activities and dialogue and colloquy. One of my favorite words, colloquy.
Love it too.
And so I did a little informal survey myself this past year to find out just how extensive our involvement was in interfaith. I was aware of the international things, and I was aware of some of the local participation in local interfaith organizations. I myself have been a member of the Marin Interfaith Council for about 15, 16, 17 years, something like that. And That's a kind of rarefied atmosphere, and I don't think a lot of interfaith beginnings are that diverse, because Marin has a lot of different kinds of religions, a lot of Buddhists, a lot of Eastern thought, as well as traditional Western thought, and traditional Abrahamic thought. By that, I'm assuming that viewers will understand that when I say Abrahamic, I mean Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the ones that are descended from Abraham. So I did this informal survey this past year, and I just discovered that COG has had a presence, an active presence, in interfaith endeavors in 27 different organizations. And for a little organization, that's a lot. And all over the country. A couple of them in Michigan, in Massachusetts, in Florida, in New Mexico, certainly in California. I said New York, Georgia, just tons of them. I didn't even know we had as many representatives or people who are active, at least, in interfaith activities. I myself have been a national interfaith representative for the Covenant for several years, and that is a position that you get approved for or not by the governing board. So you just don't walk into it and you don't get elected to it. You apply and then they say yes or no. And I enjoy it because, first of all, when you're in interfaith, you have to be on your best behavior. Mm-hmm. And that's always makes things go more smoothly. And I find that the people that I encounter in the interfaith world are very open to understanding other ways of thinking and ways of being. They're already halfway there. And I think the people that are more doctrinaire or dogmatic are less likely to be open to interfaith involvement, although it does a lot of good for the whole world. It sounds kind of crazy because we're not so religiously inclined these days, at least in the United States. I think in the Western world we're much more secular in orientation, and religion is often considered either kind of fanciful or old-fashioned or limited or unenlightened. It's funny because it's probably the opposite. Mm-hmm. Is enlightenment, at least in some religions, is something you seek. But you have to set aside your prejudices. I thought I would not be good at interfaith. I was encouraged to participate. But I thought I would not, because I know one of the ways you begin to engage is you engage in dialogue with people in a process called appreciative inquiry, and you can find a lot of information about appreciative inquiry on the web, but you tell people about what your religion is about. And since this is a predominantly Abrahamic country and predominantly a Christian country, and I was raised Christian, although two kinds of Christians. My parents were a Catholic and a Protestant. It was considered a mixed marriage when they married in the 30s. But they're, of course, more alike than Catholicism and the Protestant, they're both Christianity, so they're more alike than they are to Hindus. But I thought if you're going to talk to people about religion, and it's in this country, about your religion, that I already know that stuff. I was just steeped in it my whole entire childhood until I left my home at about 18. So I kind of felt I knew a lot about it. As it happens, I don't know so much, and the reason is it's changed like everything else, and it's become, I think, that's a broad but the general Abrahamic overall mindset has been more open because we have more exposure to other people's other kinds of cooking, other kinds of clothes, other ways of thinking. And our country, in this country in particular, is, our complexion is darkening, and we have no. Well, in California, I don't think we have a majority at all. I think white's about 48, 49%. But still, it's kind of remarkable when you are a white person who comes from a white culture and has not very much exposure beyond that. Again, unless you're urban, because it's in urban areas where you have the most diversity with population and religion. So it turned out I was good at it. I didn't. I thought I wouldn't like it. I thought it was a little too close to what I thought was evangelism, because I had a lot of pressure when I was a kid. It's not evangelistic, but I didn't know that. So it turns out I'm pretty good at it, and I like it, and they like me, and we can be constructive and do good things in the world, and that fostering that understanding benefits the whole world. And as we say, she changes everything she touches, and everything she touches changes. And it's proven true again and again and again for all of human history and before that. And it's still changing, and my hope is that it changes for the better, because I'm particularly concerned about the environment. I'm putting a lot of faith, for want of a better word, faith in younger people, that they will come up with solutions to the climate crisis that we couldn't have dreamed of, we older people. And I'm, of course, horrified that we have contributed to the degradation of our planet as much as we have, we humans. And it's really been, it's Anthropocene age. It's we who have done it. It's not lions and tigers and bears. It's humans. So that interfaith activity does foster collaboration on those kinds of efforts. And it fosters peace. It fosters peace. If you know somebody, you're less likely to be, antagonistic towards them. I think that its ignorance is the cause of a lot of it, and you don't have to sacrifice the uniqueness of your own spiritual tradition or practices by engaging in dialogue with other people who hold different perspectives. And that kind of surprised me too, but I don't know why. It shouldn't in hindsight, I think, but at the time I don't know, I guess I felt I had a sort of a chip on my shoulder when I was going to get involved in interfaith. And it turned out not to be worth bothering with, having a chip on your shoulder. So I have very good friends, as good as any of my pagan friends, who are of different faiths, and particularly Abrahamic, because that's what most of us are in this country. And I think that COG has done an amazing amount of work in that regard, and gaining us religious respect, for want of a better word. Not really understanding, although that's part of it, but acceptance and respect and acknowledgement. And that's a plus for everybody on all sides. And I think COG that's been its biggest focus, and I think its most important work. And as I said earlier, I think it has been beneficial to all pagans and to the world, really. So I think COG is sometimes perceived as being a little stuffy and out of date. And in some ways it has been stuffy and out of date, because it arose from a time when we really, of necessity, had to remain in the broom closet. And very few people were willing to be openly identified as a practitioner of witchcraft. Some of them feared for, and some of them did, lose their jobs or lose custody sometimes, or get evicted. It's minor, but it happens, and I think it's worse in some areas of the country than others. We do have federal legislation that allows us to exist, but having the legislation and defending the legislation are different things. It's a big deal to take on the larger powers in your area. It costs a lot of money. One of the people who's done an incredible amount of work is Patrick McCollum, and in particular with prisons. And again, there are federal mandates for religious freedom within prisons, and they have to comply. And he's done a lot to assure that they are complied with. And I happen to currently volunteer at San Quentin State Prison, which is near where I live, with the Wiccan circle. I don't consider myself a Wiccan. I consider myself a witch. I consider Wiccans to be British traditions derived, who carry a lineage from Britain, have, generally speaking, divine dyad, and generally speaking, and a system of elevations, first degree, second degree, and so forth. And not all contemporary witches, particularly eclectic ones or bootstrap ones, which we kind of are, have those systems. I have initiations in 2 traditions. Initiation is not required at all. It's something that someone chooses or not. And they only have, it's not even a degree. You're either in or you're out. You've made a commitment or you haven't. It's not an acknowledgement of skills. In addition to that, there's a kind of unwritten law that major changes or acknowledgement of major growth is whatever the changes have had to been in place or practiced or something like for a year and a day. That's an old concept, but it's a good one. And so generally between steps, I advocate for a year and a day changes. You don't just jump in and all of a sudden, with both feet, you're in the water and you have to keep yourself above water to keep from dying and from drowning. And I don't think it's necessarily the way to do it, although there are exceptions. And I think that seasoning has a lot of value, and I don't think a lot of younger people necessarily appreciate that. They haven't been through as many seasons, and that's part of the reason, I suppose. But there is a seasoning, a ripening, a kind of, I don't know, what you do with wines to make them as rich as they can be. And I think that applies to individuals and their spiritual lives, whether they're pagans or not. So the covenant has been really active in that regard and has sometimes had to do a lot of work with local authorities to, for instance, officiate at weddings. In particular, that's where it is noticeable. We had a lot of trouble in New York City. You wouldn't think so, but we did. And witch and lawyers were involved in making it happen, that our credentials were accepted. And now they are. And some other jurisdictions could care less. I mean, I'm in California. I've done probably 50 or more weddings, and I've never once been asked for my credentials. I sign marriage certificates, and I let the couple choose if they want me to use my witchy name, which is Macha Nightmare, or my mundane name. Some people are more comfortable with that. The wedding is just as sound, just as valid. And it's fun. And they're almost always mixed religions. Same with any life passage, or most life passages, weddings and memorials in particular, and birth, baby celebrations of new life. And they are multi-religious just because of the people who are attending. People have families that may not be on the same path, and so forth. So I try to be very attentive to not betray my own position in any great way, but to make what I'm saying and what I'm doing universally understood. And it's actually kind of fun. I mean, I even did a wedding where a lot of the relatives of the bride were Jehovah's Witnesses. So I'm pretty proud of that, and they liked it. And if they're a more progressive group in general, they'll be fascinated and ask you all kinds of questions. Because we're very, among other things, very celebratory of the seasons of life events and life in general, when we can be, which doesn't mean we can't get down and doesn't mean we don't suffer from echo anxiety like a lot of the rest of the population. But we tend to try to celebrate the richness and wonderfulness of being sustained by this earth, being alive and being embedded, or in, we're part of earth and earth is part of us. And we have to clean ourselves up, get unpolluted. Anyway, COG has been really active in most of those things. I myself was a founding member of the Marin Interfaith Climate Action. merely because I was asked. There was a person who wanted to make this happen, and he asked MIC, Marine Interfaith Council, for names of people who might be interested. And that's how I got contacted, and I became a founding member, so it's kind of cool. And I'm on the steering committee. There is a big interfaith organization in the Silicon Valley called Civic. I think it's Silicon Valley Interreligious Council. I'm pretty sure that's the right title. And COG is a founding member of that as well through Rowan Fairgrove, who does a ton of interfaith work in and out of the state. And was also, like a lot of pagans, practices more than one tradition. She in her case, Umbanda, as well as witchcraft. But that's not uncommon. You know, we have Budeo-pagans and Jew witches and high Episcopalians who tend to be more formal in their practices. And let me see, Budeo-pagans, Jew witches, what's the other one? I can't remember. I can't think of them right now. But there are other flavors because we're free to use what works for us personally or as a small group. We are not dogmatic. We are orthopractic. It's our shared practice that nourishes us. And I think even within a specific coven, belief is not required. Some people might be really literal belief is where it's at for them, and others are quite skeptical, and others can be downright non-believers. But they do find some satisfaction in sharing these rituals with other people and in honoring the turns of the season and often certain deities. I personally like to honor deities. I'm not beholden to them, but I like to do that. And one of my favorite ways of doing that is I attend, I try to, monthly new moon Kali Pujas, which are done in my community by pujaris who are trained in the method of Dakshinaswar, the Dakshinaswar temple outside of Calcutta. It's not the only kind of Kali worship, but it's a prominent one. And they do it that way at a local store. And it's quite beautiful, and we sing kirtans, and it's great. And we, end up getting a little bindi, and, we can pay our respects to her, get a little bindi, get a little bit of water, holy water, and are given some prasad, which had been dedicated to her. That isn't witchcraft per se, but it's mine. It's my witchcraft. And I have no Hindu blood, but it calls to me, and Kali in particular calls to me. So I get a satisfaction from it. I don't know how literal my belief is, but I know that it's worth my effort to go to the Kali Pujas. Now, Kali Pujas, I don't have to make happen. I just have to go. But when I do witchy stuff, most of us, we have to make it happen. We're very involving. I tend to not be so formal in the sense of having high priestesses and ladies and lords and that sort of thing. It's important to a lot of witches to use those titles. But I come from a tradition that's not hierarchical. I do not think hierarchy is a bad thing. I think it's a natural thing. I don't think it should be mandatory, and I think when it happens, it can be rotating, or there can be opportunities for people with less experience to have the opportunity to participate on a quote higher level, with greater responsibility. And I think it's also a disservice to people who that isn't their gift, running meetings or whatever. Their gift is maybe painting or dancing, and that's what they should be doing by way of expressing their religious and spiritual persuasions, than put in charge of a meeting or being some public figure. I don't think it's fair to them. And it deprives us of the real artistry they have to bring. I say they, it could be me for that matter. But I do not oppose hierarchy. I propose unacknowledged hierarchy, which I have encountered a lot in the non-hierarchical espousing world. I think it's natural. I think some people have different talents, and some of them are creative in organizing things or making things happen, and some are more support kind of things. If you put me in charge of the budget, of the money, it would be really inappropriate because I wouldn't be able to manage it. And I want people who know what they're doing to do the budgeting and the financial business, the purse warden, as it were, in the case of COG. I wouldn't be the best cook in the world either, but there are people who like to prepare food and share it and acknowledge their gratitude to the people who are doing other stuff by offering them food. So that's not my strength. What can I say?
Thank you so much, Mark.
You're welcome.
It's been a real pleasure meeting you, talking with you, and being able to share a little bit of your wisdom here.
Thank you. It's very satisfying.
Good. Let's just finish up with two things. We have copies here of a couple books, and one of them, this one here, is the first book of yours that I read, and I was very impressed with. The title, I think, kind of doesn't capture all of it because it's so much of the wisdom in there is not restricted to witchcraft, but the whole approach to the web and the creating, weaving of traditions and so forth, because so many of the religions now, I think, are neo in some sense, made new by folks, and I love that. And the other one, unfortunately, is used as a tripod right now, and this is the book that you wrote with Starhawk, and the title I can't read it right.
The Pagan Book of Living and Dying.
Which is a fascinating and important book for a number of reasons. There's a lot of interest in, ever since Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, blessed memory, a lot of really good work out there covering lots of facets of it, and there's the whole death doula movement, which I think is exciting and interesting. Mm-hmm. But you managed to cover a lot of elements that are not covered in these standard books, and I think are really interesting ways of understanding this passing. So I highly recommend that. Did you want to say anything about either of those or any of your other written books before we finish?
Sure, I'll say a little bit about the Pagan Book of Living and Dying. We got tired of faxing prayers when somebody died. That's really what it boils down to. So we started collecting death-oriented material from various pagans and other sources. And the Pagan Book of Living and Dying is an anthology. Not everybody in it is a witch. Not everybody is part of Reclaiming, but Reclaiming did it. And it's called The Pagan Book of Living and Dying because that was part of the series the publisher was doing. It was a major publisher, Harper, San Francisco. They had a Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and they wanted a pagan one. But we did a prototype originally the year before this came out called Crossing Over, a Pagan Manual on Death and Dying. These sounds so certain and so definitive, and makes me a little uncomfortable. But hey, it sells more, it gets more exposure, and it helps people of all kinds. It's been used in hospices, so lots of people appreciate what's in it. It does address things in practical and theoretical ways from all kinds of cultures, but it addresses things that were not on the table back when other holy texts, for want of a better word, were written. For instance, there's a section and a ritualizing of releasing a donor's essence from his organs or her organs for organ donation, because a lot of people are very uncomfortable kind of taking apart their loved one. So there's ritual for releasing the essence of that person from their organs, and that wasn't a possibility. They weren't transplanting organs when they wrote the Torah or the Bible or any of those other texts. And we have a section on recovering from stillbirths and abortions. People who have died by violence or in great distress. And I think most of the stuff is accessible to everybody. We tried to make it accessible to everybody, even if they didn't want to use, say, names of deities and stuff. I even found, because there's a section on suicide, I even found a deity of suicide. I don't remember her name. She's a goddess, but it's an Aztec goddess. That was depicted with a noose, which is amazing to me.
Absolutely.
But some people find some kind of, I don't know, for want of a better word, comfort in knowing that is also sanctified sometimes, not just a terrible sin, whereas the way it's viewed by some people.
Well, certainly we know that there's been a lot more acceptance of medical suicide as an issue of compassion.
Assisted suicide, yeah.
Release from physical pain and so forth. On the way up here, I was listening to a radio program, and they mentioned the statistics on suicide, which just astounded me. Far more people die of suicide than are homicide victims, or even more surprisingly,
Is that right?
of automobile accidents in this country.
Wow.
So suicide is a major issue, and I think that the spiritual needs of those left behind are often actually not just ignored, but their pain is deepened by the insisting of the priests or ministers of treating the death in a certain way.
Like it was a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll go to hell forever or whatever it is. But
Well, it's bad if you love them and you lose them that way.
yes.
But it isn't necessarily a bad choice. And there's consciously chosen suicide, which in the AIDS movement is called conscious self-deliverance, which I think is a great phrase. And there's, suicide of despair. And of course, there's very slow suicide.
Oh, yes.
Such as, treating yourself so badly with drugs or your lifestyle or whatever that you do reach an earlier end than you would have otherwise. I suffered, my family, a close family, we suffered a suicide this past year, person only 39 years old. And a couple of years before that, a very, very dear friend who is a witch. In the case of the young person, we had no idea he was even in that state, just out of the blue. In the case of my friend who passed away a few years ago, close friend, it was not really a surprise. We were unhappy. We were aggrieved. But we weren't really surprised. He carried a lot of burdens, and it was very agonizing for him, and that was his choice. And I respect his having made it, and boy, I'm bummed out he's not here. So.
Well, we thank you for the gift of that book, because it is an important topic.
It is, and we tend to be in a death-denying culture. We give our stuff to experts to do. Somebody does our taxes.
Yeah.
We have something to do with the courts of law. Lawyer does it. Your body, a doctor does, and your dead person, there's a whole funeral industry around it, which is changing rapidly. We also talk about green burials, which was not a thing.
Which ties into your concerns with the environment.
Right, exactly. And green burials are much better for the environment than, say, cremations.
Yes.
Even though cremations seem like kind of a neat and easy way. And I'm not opposed to cremations, but they're not really sustainable with the environmental crisis we're in. I think a lot of India, I've not ever been there, but I think a lot of India has been denuded of trees because of building big pyres. It's wonderful to have big pyres, but there's only so many trees that can be regrown as fast as people are dying. And the crematories are very contaminating. They're very polluting. Things that are released in the process, even though it's a nice way to carry your loved one around afterwards, to have them with you. But you can do other things. I think you can do other things. But green burial is expensive because, A, the funeral industry doesn't make any money off of it, or doesn't make much. And there's also a home death movement that's grown. And people can find professional assistants to do it. There was a thing, this is a little bit off topic, but in Sonoma County, which is the next county up for me, there was a lot of people having home deaths, which, most people, especially if they know they're dying, they're in a decline from some disease or from age or something, want to stay in their home with their loved ones. They don't want to go in some sterile hospital environment. And so people advocate home death. And there was a crematorium in that area that did the cremations for people who had home deaths. Of course, you always have to get a death certificate. You can't be cavalier about that. You have to have a death certificate. I do have stories about occasions when that hasn't been the case. Crematorium was sort of boycotted by the funeral homes. They didn't want to send them any more business if they continued to service the home death community. So there was bizarre pressure in that respect. But with home death, or with any kind of death, if we have stuff in the book as well about washing and blessing the body of the departed person. But you can make the coffin, which a lot of people have done. You can make a shroud. You can put magical things in it or whatever on them or in them. And there's an involvement in that. And when you touch a person who is gone, you realize that whatever enlivened them, whatever gave a spark of life to them, is no longer there. Yes. They're an empty husk. And I think it fosters the healing process. Used to be, for instance, that stillbirths were whisked away in hospitals. Now they put them on mommy's tummy. Because she can feel that new being is not in residence in that body. So I advocate that, if possible. It seems a little grim for some people, but I think it is beneficial, and I think it does help foster the acceptance of the person's absence.
A lot of wisdom in that. My wife and I had a stillbirth, and our little daughter stayed with us for a while, and I believe that was really useful there. Mm-hmm. And then my mother-in-law just passed away a couple of years ago at age 100.
Wow.
In her home, in the presence of my wife, and that was a beautiful...
Sacred.
Yes, sacred.
It's a sacred moment, sacred work. I bless all the hospice workers around the world. And now, of course, as you mentioned, there is a death midwife movement happening. That was never the case before because, like I said, we farmed it out to the experts. Not that the experts aren't fine people, and they might do great things, and it might be better for some people to use that service, but it shouldn't be mandatory.
It should not be mandatory.
And it did have a lot of... The reason was, like, for instance, a lot of Americans think that embalming is mandatory. It's not. It is if you transport the body a certain distance. You came into common practice during the Civil War, when people wanted the bodies of their loved ones returned from the battlefield to them. So they embalmed them and put them on trains. But it is not required, it is not necessary, and it is polluting to the world. And sealed tombs that are hermetically sealed are awful. And, if you have to put somebody in a container, wicker baskets are ideal. The elements can come and go through those openings, and you can be returned to mom more readily. So that's what I've got to say about the Pagan Book of Living and Dying.
Thank you. It is a wonderful thing, and I recommend anybody who will experience death in any form whatsoever be aware of what's in there. And I think that doesn't exclude anybody I know.
No, I don't think it does.
Thank you so much, Macha.
You're welcome.
It's been a real pleasure meeting you, talking with you, and being able to share a little bit of your wisdom here.
Thank you. It's very satisfying.